Good evening. My name is Councillor Heather Fletcher, and I'd like to welcome you on behalf of Salford City Council to our event to mark Holocaust Memorial Day 2022. It is important to note that the 27th of January was chosen as the date for Holocaust Memorial Day, as it was on this very date in 1945 that the Allies liberated Auschwitz-Birkenau, which was the largest of all the Nazi extermination camps. On Holocaust Memorial Day, we remember the 6 million Jews who were murdered by the Nazis, together with other Nazi victims, such as the Roma and Sinti Gypsies, the mentally ill, the physically disabled, those persecuted because of their sexuality, those persecuted because of their political and trade union activities. We also remember the victims of all subsequent Holocausts and genocides in Rwanda, Cambodia, Bosnia, and Darfur. This year's theme is One Day. Firstly, I would like to welcome all the distinguished guests who have joined us this evening, especially the Right Worshipful, the Ceremonial Mayor of Salford, Councillor John Mullen. His Grace Bishop John, Bishop of Salford, our Chief Executive Tom Stannard, Salford MP Rebecca Long-Bailey, Chief Inspector Paul Coburn of the GMP, and Ben Levy, Area Manager of Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service. We have a very varied and informative programme in which our City Mayor, Mr Paul Dennett, will give his reflections, as will the Vice-Chancellor of Salford University, Dr Sam Grogan. Shelley Laskier, the daughter of Holocaust survivor Sam Laskier, will tell her father's inspirational story. This is made all the more poignant by the fact Shelley and her father Sam attended our last live Holocaust Memorial Day in 2020. Unfortunately, Sam passed away not long after that. We have contributions from pupils of Westwood Park, Christ the King Walkden, the Oasis Academy, Walkden Co-op Academy, and the Salford Youth Council. Cantor Joseph Muller and his choir, conducted by Tim Dempsey, will sing 2 pieces. We shall conclude our programme with candle lighting and with prayers. I now invite our first speaker, who is our City Mayor, Mr Paul Dennett.
Good evening and welcome to Salford's annual Holocaust Memorial event. There can be few historical sites as bleak as the death camps at Auschwitz-Birkenau, and few places so bereft of hope. The dark stories of death and despair we're all so familiar with from Auschwitz are almost unique in their brutality since ancient times. Yet in my readings on the history of the camp, I've discovered a world of resilience and resistance, which I could have never guessed existed from the well-known histories we often read in textbooks at school. The theme of this year's Holocaust Memorial Day is One Day, and I wanted to discuss the events of one day in August 1943, where what appeared like a small act of resistance took place, which has profoundly shaped our understanding and comprehension of history. The Kampfgruppe Auschwitz, the Auschwitz Resistance Group, or the KGA, had been formed earlier in 1943. primarily founded from former members of the international brigades, the international volunteers who had fought for the Spanish Republic against Franco in the 1930s. The group began to coordinate a large-scale resistance movement from within Auschwitz against the camp authorities, stockpiling weapons and explosives, funneling food into the barracks of detainees, and helping potentially political prominent prisoners to escape. Importantly, the group also began gathering data and evidence on the goings-on in the camp, which at that moment in time were often shrouded in a dark veil of secrecy. The prisoners who made up the KGA had nothing, yet with what little they did have, they were determined never to be defeated. Some of their activities were dramatic. The group staged an armed uprising in 1944 amongst the Sonder Commando. The Sonder Commando were prisoners tasked with disposing of the bodies from the gas chambers. And it was an uprising which took the lives of 3 SS officers and severely injured many more. Unfortunately, 45 Sonder Commandos were put to death as a result. However, many of their actions were less dramatic. On the day in August 1943, with the help of several KGA colleagues, Greek Jewish partisan Alberto Herrera smuggled a camera into the gas chambers and was able to take 4 shaky photos of the processes around the execution of camp inmates and the disposal of their bodies. Taken from a German-made Leica camera, which had been hidden in a bucket by the International Brigadier and the KGA member David Chmielewski. The pictures clearly show mounds of bodies being sifted through by fellow Sonder Commandos and groups of inmates being undressed in advance of their execution. Known as the Sonder Commando photographs, these images are the only images we have showing the bodies of deceased prisoners in and around the gas chambers. Smuggled from the camp in a tube of toothpaste by the Polish resistance, they have become an invaluable piece of evidence of the horrors committed in Auschwitz, and hugely effective in exposing to the world the evil that was occurring in that place during the Holocaust. I sometimes think on that morning, as Alberto and his comrades readied themselves for their task, could they possibly have known how important those photographs would turn out to be? How must they have felt as they prepared themselves for their mission, to feel the nervousness, the anxiety they must have been experiencing, both mentally and physically? Did they look out to the bright August sky and wonder if this could be their last morning? Did the idea of taking a few photographs seem insignificant to them, or even irrelevant, in the context of such huge suffering, misery, and depth? As it was, Alberto Herrera would live on barely another year before his untimely death. Whilst transporting ash from the crematoria, he freed himself from the transport after stunning both guards with a shovel and attempted an escape into the river Vistula. Sadly, he was captured, tortured, and executed several days later. But the world should be eternally thankful for the risks that he and his colleagues made on that day. It is no exaggeration to say that images such as these played a significant part in the war effort, galvanizing public opinion and hardening the attitude of the Allies in their pursuit of victory. The story of the Sonder Commando photographs for me shows the importance of small acts of resistance as well as those of larger acts. It shows how even in the most hopeless of circumstances, those that organise and work together can never truly be denied their agency. It shows how a determination to fight and help others can sustain us in even the most hopeless of times and places. And it proves to me the truth of the old trade union saying that it is better to die on one's feet than to live on one's knees. And I remain awed, stunned and humbled by those who put such value-laden sentiments into action. Had Alberto Herrera and David Chmielewski and their accomplices known on that morning that they took those photos, that one day, another day, the war would be over and the gates of Auschwitz would be opened and their fellow prisoners would experience freedom once again, I have no doubt they would have each given their lives gladly. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Sam Grogan and I'm delighted to be representing the University of Salford at this important event tonight. We had been due to be together in person at the university for tonight's occasion, and so it's with sadness that I speak to you from behind a screen. It seems to have been the pattern of the last couple of years. But being apart, as the past 2 years have shown us, does not mean that we're not together. Even virtually, we can share our commemoration of the atrocities of the past and collectively resolve to ensure that they never happen again. The theme of this year's Holocaust Memorial Day is One Day. And this theme can be interpreted in a number of ways. It can, of course, refer to that one day in the future that we're all working towards, where there is no genocide. As I've reflected on this while preparing my remarks, I've also thought of another interpretation. It's that the Holocaust and the genocides that followed elsewhere in the world are actually a collection of one days, a series of single days, one after the other, of torture and trauma that tell a story so dark that in the midst of those single days, many did not expect to see the light ever again. And it was for those who have lived through genocide and those we have so tragically lost, it was about taking it one day at a time, because the future did not seem like something that was ever going to come to pass. But it did. One day, the horror ended. And that day was 27th of January, 1945. The day that Auschwitz-Birkenau, the largest Nazi death camp, was liberated. And that's why we come together each year at this time. And I'm really proud of the part that the university plays in these commemorations. We're aware that our immediate community around us in Salford includes a significant Jewish population, and we understand how important this event is to our locality. We also have Jewish students and Jewish staff. And the diversity of our staff and our student bodies is what makes this place so special. It's one of the things that attracted me to come and work to Salford, with Salford at the very start. And so we look to celebrate it, to promote it, and importantly, to protect it where we can. We're also an institution of education and learning. And education and learning is a big part of what Holocaust Memorial Day is all about. One day, to learn more about the past and take action in order to create a safer, inclusive future. So thank you once again for letting us be involved in this community event. It's a huge privilege to do so. And looking forward to the future, I look forward to seeing you in person again. If not next year's event, then perhaps one day. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Shelley Laskier, and tonight I would like to share with you the story of my father, Sam Laskier. He was born in Warsaw, Poland in 1927, where he was known as Shmulek or Shmuel. He had an older sister called Lonia and a younger sister called Rushka. They lived in a two-roomed apartment on Stavky Street, where both of my grandparents worked as tailors. My father and his sisters had a very happy childhood. September 1939 saw a day where that changed forever, as my father watched the German army march through Warsaw, bringing with them their anti-Jewish laws. Almost immediately, all Jews were forced to wear a Star of David on their clothes. Dad was no longer allowed to attend his secular school. He and other children were not allowed to play in the parks or playgrounds, and people were restricted from even walking on some of the pavements. Food rationing was brought in. Businesses were closed. Jewish learning was forbidden. And the reason for all of these new laws, it was simply that they were Jews. In October of 1940, the Warsaw Ghetto was established. This was to become the largest ghetto in Poland. Not only was the entire Jewish population of Warsaw confined there, but Jews arrived from Germany and many nearby Polish towns and cities also. Over 400,000 Jews were imprisoned in an area of just 1.3 square miles. My father's family were allowed to stay in their apartment, which fell inside the ghetto walls, but were forced to share their small space with strangers, making living conditions very cramped. On average, people were now living 7 to a room. Food was scarce in the ghetto. There were long queues for even the most basic of foods: bread, milk, sugar. Hunger and starvation was everywhere, going hand in hand with sickness and disease. SS soldiers would march through the streets ridiculing the Jews, beating them, abusing them, forcing them to clear the snow from the road or scrub the pavements. If you objected, you were shot. It didn't matter if you were a man or a woman or a child, if you had been poor or wealthy. You were just a Jew. You were their enemy. Fearing for his health and safety, my father's parents had to bribe a van driver to smuggle him out of the ghetto in order that he could go and live with family in another city where life was a little easier. However, the van driver was too afraid to risk his own life to save the life of a Jewish child, so he gave up his attempt. Eventually, both Dad and his first cousin were smuggled out and able to get on a train which took them 130 miles away to a place called Ostrowiec, where their extended family lived. My father was not even 14 years old when he left Warsaw, and that was to be the last time he was ever to see his parents or his older sister. After an awfully long and frightening journey, during which my dad spent most of the time hiding in a small toilet so as not to be recognised as a child from the ghetto, he was dirty, unkempt and very skinny. In Ostrowiec, the Jewish district was not as restricted as in Warsaw. Although Jews still had to wear a star, food was more readily available and the Jewish community was not quite as worried. My father's younger sister, Rushka, arrived about a month later after also being smuggled out of the ghetto in Warsaw. She arrived very sick with typhus, and their aunt was reluctant to take her in as she was highly infectious, so she went to live with their grandparents not far away where living conditions were a little easier. Life in Ostrowiec didn't stay quiet for very long. a ghetto was formed, and once again, the Jews had laws and restrictions imposed on them by the Nazis. My father watched his elderly grandmother, together with other old and infirm people, loaded into trucks and driven away to a holding, where they were gassed to death by the fumes of exhaust pipes. This happened on a regular basis. The Jews of Ostrowiec were systematically transported to numerous labour camps around Poland. It was then that my father was separated from his sister and the majority of the rest of his family. Dad was taken to a work camp, Bozochov. After a few days of living behind barbed wire, he and some of the other boys decided to try to escape. They managed to cut through the wire and get out, but once they had done, they realised that life was even more dangerous on the outside. There was no money, they had no papers, certainly no food, and where were they to go? Surrounded by their enemies, both soldiers and civilians, the fear was far too much for them to cope with, as had they been found, they would have been handed over to the SS and probably shot. So they sneaked back inside the camp. Here, at least, they were amongst their own. Next, he was sent to a male-only camp called Blizhin. Because my dad was young and able, the SS officers chose him to work in a quarry breaking up large stones. He left the barracks very early every morning and was marched to the quarry with other prisoners and marched back again late in the evening. One day, whilst pulling a cart full of heavy stones, an inebriated guard accused him of leaning on the cart instead of pulling it. For his own amusement, the guard forced Dad into a field, made him get down onto his stomach in the mud and do relentless press-ups. His body was weak from the lack of food and he was exhausted. He begged the guard to shoot him, but the guard knew that he had to return with the same number of prisoners as he had left with. So he kicked Dad repeatedly, and Dad was ordered to get back to work. In the spring of 1944, my father was sent in crowded cattle cars to Auschwitz-Birkenau. When he arrived, he had no idea of the vast expanse of the camp, nor the killing machine it came to be renowned for. He recalls being met by SS soldiers with snarling dogs, and then being pulled off the cart and ordered to strip. He and his fellow prisoners were then sent to be deloused and their whole bodies were shaved. He was given a striped uniform to wear. It was then that he received his tattooed number on his arm. He was now dehumanized, and instead of having a name, he was referred to by his number, B2413. After what seemed like a random selection process, Dad was sent to Arbeitslager D, Work Camp D, which was based in Birkenau, sometimes known as Auschwitz II. His barrack was filled with bunk beds, 3 high, and many men slept in the same bunk. They had neither pillows or blankets. The food they were given consisted of a watery soup, which was made from old potato peelings. And on a good day, they got a small slice of stale bread. My father was in a forced labour unit, digging drainage canals. On one occasion, he was accused of stealing a harmonica. What was he going to do with a harmonica? He had never even seen one. However, he was beaten hard over the head with a heavy piece of wood with a metal tip on it, and was bleeding heavily. When he tried to run, he was chased by 2 big black Alsatian dogs. The guards released him from the dogs, and he was told to go and clean himself up and get back to work. Somehow he managed to bandage his head with a dirty cloth and carry on. On returning to his barracks, and in a lot of pain, the block elder took pity on Dad and arranged for him to be moved to the children's block, also based at Birkenau. Life was just as tough there, but at least he wasn't forced to dig drainage canals anymore. Still, he saw people being shot for no reason. He witnessed people being rounded up, sent away to be marched into gas chambers. And the smell from the burning bodies that rose from the crematoria through the days and the nights would stay with him forever. The constant hunger was unbearable, and he had heard no news about his family. He was maybe 15 or 16 years old. On one remarkable day, he was walking past the barbed wire that separated the men and the women when he saw his sister on the other side of the wire. He shouted her name and she turned. He quickly threw over the meagre bread ration that he'd been saving, and she caught it. Had either of them been seen by the guards, their fate would undoubtedly been death. In early January of 1945, my father was sent to yet another camp. This one was called Buchenwald. Initially, he and his fellow prisoners had to march by foot, without water or food or warm clothing. The lucky ones had old shoes. It was freezing temperatures. Some fell to the floor from exhaustion or disease. They were shot. Some simply died from starvation or hypothermia. The remaining prisoners were then loaded once more onto cattle cars. By the time Dad reached Buchenwald, the SS knew that they were losing their hold in Europe and that the Russians and the Americans were closing in. German soldiers would still evacuate the barracks daily and send prisoners to their death. Dad saw public hangings, executions, and more shootings. Unbelievably, SS soldiers had strict orders to continue murdering as many Jews as possible, even in the face of defeat. They had to try to cover up their tracks by killing as many witnesses to their crimes as they could. Dad would hide himself away in the loft of the barracks every day when they came to take more people. Eventually, he thought it was impossible to continue hiding and was worried about what would happen had he been found. So he followed the crowd. It was early April 1945, and Dad was loaded once again onto open cattle cars. Their destination, although they did not know it, was to be Theresienstadt, a concentration camp just outside of Prague, in what was then Czechoslovakia. Cruelly, had he stayed in hiding where he was for just 1 or 2 more days, he would have been liberated by the American army. Instead, this journey to Theresienstadt proved to be the hardest. The open carts were filled beyond capacity, and there was no food or water. People would grab at blades of grass, flowers, leaves, or snow, or rainwater to drink during the few times the cars slowed down. By the time the wagons arrived at Theresienstadt, many had died and the corpses had been moved into separate carts to make room for the living. They had been travelling for almost 4 weeks. As the carriages pulled into the sidings, they noticed that there were no German soldiers outside shouting orders at them. They could hear no barking dogs. There was no sound of gunfire. The Germans had fled from Theresienstadt to save their own lives and not be caught and tried for their heinous crimes. That was the 8th of May, 1945, and the Russian army entered and liberated Theresienstadt camp. Finally, they were free. This torturous war was over. The Russian soldiers were very kind to them and gave them what food they had. My father said that he smiled for the first time in almost 6 years. He was now 17 years old. Dad and his fellow survivors were given some clothes and food, but some of his friends got very sick from eating the food because their stomachs had been deprived for so long. Some even died from food poisoning. My father began to recover though and grow stronger each day. Desperate to see if any of his family had survived, Dad, together with a friend, jumped onto the back of a train to Poland. They travelled for over 100 miles, hanging onto the back rails as they had no money to pay for a seat. When they arrived, they were driven away from their old homes by new residents who had taken over the property when the Jews had been transported to the concentration camps. There was no family left there. There were virtually no Jews left there. Dad later learned that about 250,000 Warsaw Ghetto prisoners were rounded up from their homes and sent to Treblinka, an extermination camp. There, they were murdered in gas chambers within hours of arriving. Shockingly, there are no records, but it is assumed that this is where my grandparents, my aunt, and many, many cousins met their death. The Central British Fund, now called World Jewish Relief, was authorised by the British government, to find 1,000 Jewish orphans under the age of 16 to bring to the UK for rehabilitation. From 1,000, only 732 could be found, and some of those, including my dad, had falsified their age on their identification papers. My father was given a place on one of the 10 RAF Sterling bombers to come with 300 orphans being taken to Cumbria. He had nothing but the clothes he was standing in. He had no family he knew of, certainly no money, and definitely no home. And he carried with him the vivid trauma of war. He remembered that flight, sitting on the floor around the edges of the bomber aircraft as there were no seats, just a big door in the middle of the floor where the bombs would have dropped just a few short months earlier. He had no idea what was to become of him, but he knew that he was going to be safe, and he knew that he was going to be fed, and those were the two most important things to him at that time. They arrived into Crosby-on-Eden and were taken to the Calgarth estate at Troutbeck Bridge, close to Lake Windermere, which was to be their home for the coming months. Dad said that he arrived into paradise on that day. He used to talk about their first meal in the large dining room with its long trestle tables. There was bread, and unbelievably there was jam, which he hadn't seen since before the war. Some of the children were taking the bread off the table and hiding them under their shirts and down their trousers for fear of never seeing food again. Dad also remembered, after years of sleeping in crowded bunks, that he now had his own room, his own bed, with clean, fresh, white sheets and a pillow. A small piece of chocolate was left by his bed on that very first night. For the first time in many years, he felt that he was a human being, but so lost in a big, strange world. This group of 300 Polish orphans who arrived into the Lake District are now known as the Windermere Boys, or the Windermere Children as depicted in a recent BBC drama. The task of trying to find family was very hard, but with the help of the Red Cross, my dad's younger sister Rushka, who he had last seen at the barbed wire fence in Auschwitz, had been found in Krakow, Poland. She was flown over a few months later to Edinburgh. Dad couldn't wait to see her, and the reunion between them can only be described as emotional. She too had suffered terrible trauma, but finally they had each other. After 4 months or so, the orphans at Windermere had to leave the security and serene surroundings and start new lives as free girls and boys. Some went off to Israel, some to Canada, some went to the USA and Australia, and some stayed in the UK. Dad found himself here in Manchester, where he was still supported by charities until he was able to look after himself. He held numerous jobs while trying to find his feet, and eventually he bought a business selling menswear. He always said how proud he was to be a British citizen, and never took the opportunities the British government had given him for granted. My father married my mum in 1956, and they had 4 children and went on to have 5 grandchildren. As the children of a Holocaust survivor, we knew never to ask Dad about his childhood in the camps, and he was reluctant to share his horrific experiences with us. My mum was often woken up from the screams through his nightmares. Only in later years was he able to open up to us. It was always painful for him to give his witness account. It brought his terrible childhood experiences to the forefront of his mind, and he didn't ever want to upset or frighten others. He told me once that there were things that happened in the camps that he would never be able to verbalise for fear of reliving the horror of them. Things that no child or adult should ever witness. When asked how he survived through such a terrible ordeal, he would say, "Through nothing more than luck." One day, my father was a happy child in Poland. One day, the Germans marched in and took away his freedom. One day, my father had a large, loving family. One day, they were murdered. On the 14th of August 1945, my father was given refuge by the United Kingdom and a chance to start a new life as a free man. On the 14th of August 2020, my father passed away, 75 years to the very day that he arrived in this country. I pray that one day everyone will know freedom. I pray that one day we will learn to respect each other's differences. I pray that one day we will learn from the past so we don't make the same mistakes for the future. I pray that one day we will live in a world where peace will prevail. Thank you.
We are Westwood Park and we are proud to be part of the Holocaust Memorial service. Pupils are at school and are a Holocaust survivor, and recently we brought into work to teach us about Jewish life and work with our oldest pupils about the tragedy of the Holocaust and genocides that have happened in other parts of the world. Our hearts go out to the people who suffered these terrible events.
We would like to share with you a poem that we've been studying in our English lessons, which was inspired by the sense of loss at the passing of a loved one during the Holocaust.
Do not stand at my grave and weep. I am not there, I do not sleep. I am the thousand winds that blow. I am the diamond glint on snow. I am the sunlight of my good rain. I am the gentle autumn rain. When you awaken in the morning's hush, I am the swift uplifting rush of quiet birds in circled flight. I am the soft star that shines at night. Do not stand at my grave and cry. I am not there, I did not die.
Although there were terrible atrocities, there were also stories of courage and hope. These are some of the survivors we have found out about.
David Bale was the son of a Polish farmer. He returned from his work one day to discover that his whole family was taken away. He was devastated. Later he was arrested for standing in a queue to get bread. He was made to work in several different camps. In one he had to make gunpowder and was badly hurt in an explosion. Yet he was resilient. He managed to escape and hide until the Russians liberated the camp. None of his family survived. He moved to America and started a new life. He ran a successful shop and volunteers at the Holocaust Memorial Museum.
Sheila Bernard and her family were trapped in the ghetto. Their situation looked bleak. However, an non-Jewish family friend who was a policeman wanted to help. He helped Sheila and her mum escape and hid them. His whole family were frightened that they would be arrested and killed for helping Jewish people, and they would abandon him. But he continued to support Sheila and her mother, and they survived. Sheila lived and had a family of her own because of his bravery.
Ralph Ferris came from a wealthy family. His father sold all their property and turned the money into diamonds. A local farmer, a Gentile, allowed the family to live in a tiny cottage on his farm. One day, the youngest son in the farmer's family ran to the cottage to say they had been betrayed to the Nazis, and they managed to run for their lives. They later discovered that it was the farmer's older son who had had betrayed them. The Nazis burned their cottage to the ground. They were able to hide in another attic again, and the Nazis came. This time they were saved by a cat which made lots of noise and distracted the Nazis' attention, and they did not continue their search. Ralph became an English professor and was able to share his experiences to educate others.
Perhaps most incredibly, Angela also rich to write. She's one of the only two babies known to have been born in Auschwitz. When she was born, she was so tiny that she was not able to cry, and this probably saved her life. She became a teacher, and she has taken it upon herself to be the voice of those children who did not survive the concentration camps. Her testimony has led to the 21st century convictions of several former Nazis.
At Westwood Park, we will continue to learn about the Holocaust and other genocides, and teach others so these horrors never happen again.
We have learned that the butterfly is a symbol of the 1.5 million children who died. Its beauty and fragility are reminders that there is hope in the most terrible circumstances. We must strive to make sure that this never happens. There is always hope.
This atrocity to mankind cannot happen again. Remember us. For we were the children whose dreams and lives were stolen away.
God, you created us all in your own likeness. We thank you for the wonderful diversity of races and cultures in your world. Enrich our lives by ever-widening circles of fellow feeling and understanding. Show us your presence in those most different from us, so that in all our relationships, both by what we have in common and by things in which we differ, we may come to know you more fully in your creation.
A message from Anne Frank. I don't think of all the misery, but of all the beauty that still remains. How wonderful it is that nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world.
Bella moves, loine sonor. My name is Freddie Oldfield and I'm an ambassador for the Anne Frank Trust, a role that has been an absolute privilege to be selected for. My journey started back in March of 2019 when I was in Year 8. The Trust came into my school, Cope Academy Warden, looking for pupils from different year groups to become ambassadors and give guided talks to students throughout the school and the wider community. Along with 20 other students, I put my name forward to become an ambassador. Keziah Major and Jonathan McKee, two of the Trust representatives, came into school to meet us as well as to introduce themselves and the Trust. Once we got to understand the harrowing story of Anne Frank, we were split into 3 groups and gave talks to not only students from my school, but primary school students as well as BBC One. My role in the talks was to present the final 2 display boards to depict the final stages of Anne's life. The more talks that I did, the more my confidence built for public speaking and being able to express myself verbally. I will always look back on those guided talks as like the start of a fire that can never burn out. Once the guided tours had finished, I didn't do anything else with the Trust until each ambassador received a letter in May 2019 informing us that 3 ambassadors will be picked to go down to London on June the 12th to celebrate what would have been Anne's 90th birthday at the Houses of Commons in Westminster. I was delighted when they told Jack, Carris and I that we were the 3 that had been selected. Furthermore, we would actually be hosting the event at the House of Commons, a place not many people get to visit. When I arrived, I was awe-inspired to take in every detail as this was something that I was going to remember for the rest of my life. Along with my school, there were other ambassadors from the Trust, from different schools across the country. We each spoke at a lectern in front of 150 MPs, Tim Robertson, CEO of the Anne Frank Trust, Eva Schloss, Anne Frank's stepsister and Holocaust survivor, and the late James Brokenshire, a former Conservative Party MP who sadly passed away in October last year. The event was my first real go at public speaking and I loved every minute of it. What an invaluable experience. Once the event came to a close, I approached James and had a very friendly chat with him. He gave me some encouraging pointers on public speaking, mainly how to vocalise properly and engage my audience. His advice will always be with me as an ambassador and in life. Additionally, I got to meet Eva, which was the first time I ever met a Holocaust survivor in person. What an articulate and friendly lady she is. The next Holocaust survivor I met was Sam Gonzalez, who came into school with his son, Robbie, in the summer of 2019 to give his heartfelt account of his life. The harrowing experience that he endured was extremely upsetting, and as a group we were all very upset. It brought our understanding of the Holocaust to life and made us see the tragedy from a very personal perspective. Sam's words left such an impression on me and completely reinforced why there should be ambassadors in my generation for the Anne Frank Trust. I was really looking forward to seeing Sam again at the Holocaust Memorial evening in January 2020 at Salford University. Sam had written his speech for the evening, but sadly would never get to share it with us. He sadly passed away in late 2019. His son, Robbie, who he had the pleasure of meeting previously, very bravely read his dad's speech. It was a harrowing account of real trauma depicting Sam's tragic time at the hands of the Nazis. I felt extremely emotional. Robbie is such a warm, selfless, genuine character, and later in the evening was more concerned for Jack, Harris and I, as we had to speak straight after him, rather than himself. Our role at the memorial service was to give an account of our time with the Trust as ambassadors and why prejudice and discrimination should be eradicated. Sadly, because of the COVID pandemic, the memorial service will be the last time the three of us as ambassadors would speak publicly together. Just prior to lockdown on March the 5th, 2020, I went down to London again, along with several other people from my school, to attend a student conference at the Docklands Museum. The day was centred around different talks about anti-bullying, prejudice and discrimination. Along with other students from different schools across the country, we each listened to the different talks and got to give a presentation at the end of the event on standing up to negativity and making our futures more positive. Life took a very unusual turn thereafter, and my work with the Anne Frank Trust was forced to temporarily pause. However, we got to talk about our roles one more time on television. Jack, Harris and I were approached by ITV to appear on Granada Reports to explain our roles and what they meant to us. Each of us got to have a private interview with Anne O'Connor from Granada, which was a very rewarding experience. During lockdown, we were delighted to hear that, as ambassadors for the Anne Frank Trust, Jack, Harris and I had been nominated by our school to receive a prestigious Diana Award. As a charity remembering the late Princess Diana, their mission is to develop and inspire positive change in the future of young people. The award recognises exceptional young people for selflessly creating and sustaining positive social change. To be nominated was exciting. To be told that we had won left us speechless. I am extremely proud to be an ambassador for the Anne Frank Trust, a role that I have taken very seriously. Even though my time in school is coming to an end, I really hope that my connection with the Trust will always be there. In my opinion, my role was to improve equality for all, and as the Diana Award itself says, they want to empower young people to make the positive changes. Young people have the power to change the world. Diana, Princess of Wales.
With thoughts like these, my anxious boding mind, recall those pleasing scenes I left behind. Scenes where fair liberty in bright array makes darkness bright and e'en illumes day, where no complexion, wealth or station can protects the wretch who makes a slave of man.
One day the sun will rise, one day the sun will set. What happens in between has not decided yet. One day can lead to love, another leads to hate. One day can be a day to mourn, another to celebrate. As time goes by, we seem to strive for more creative ways to hurt each other to improve our world, but different are those who pay. Let's make this hatred history and learn to get along, celebrate diversity and make prejudice wrong. We pray for victims far and near of genocide and war, the Jews, Rwanda, Bosnia, Cambodia, Darfur. May we seek for every day to live our lives in peace, accept each other's differences and make the killing cease. Our prayer is for a world as one. Our hope is yet to see one day when genocide will stop and all will be set free.
One day what was planted will be cut down. One day we will all die, but, and this is the most important thing, we're not dead yet. One day we will rise above. One day we will learn to fly, our wings ephemeral in the dying sky. One day the destination will be peace. One day we will break the walls of division. One day what is perpetual will bleed red. One day the sky will be painted with the colours of our freedom. One day we will see the dark path ahead of us bathed in light. One day the world will stay afloat on a sea of love. One day they will find the perfect moment to shine. One day those wrongfully imprisoned will open the gates to freedom. One day we soar high in the skies of freedom. One day we will reach the end of the dark road of evil. One day we will wipe away the tears that blind our eyes. One day our escape will glow with the answer of redemption. One day, but not now. One day we'll all be seen as candles. We can either be blown out or burn bright.
The next stage of this event is the lighting of the candles. I'll just explain a little bit about that. We light 8 candles to remember the 6 million Jews and many other victims who were murdered by the Nazis, and to remember all genocides since 1945. These candles will be lit by representatives in recognition of the different communities who were persecuted and murdered. We light the candles as a sign of our determination to dispel darkness and to affirm our commitment to make positive contributions to our communities. The first candle will be lit by Shelley last year in memory of the 6 million Jewish people murdered by the Nazis. The second candle will be lit by Owen Power in memory of those who perished under Nazi rule because of their disabilities. The third candle will be lit by Councillor Shamina August in memory of the Bosnian Muslims who were murdered in Srebrenica in 1995. The fourth candle will be lit by Ricky Hewitt in memory of those persecuted and murdered by the Nazis because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. The fifth candle will be lit by Councillor Alexis Sharma to remember those who were murdered in the Rwandan genocide. The sixth candle will be lit by Magda Sachs, Chair of Salford Unison, to commemorate the trade unionists, socialists and communists who were also Nazi victims. The seventh candle will be lit by Alex Klein, Chair of Salford Standing Advisory Committee for Religious Education. The final and eighth candle will be lit by Reverend Daniel Burton, who is the Chair of Salford Interfaith Network. And to conclude, a single stone will also be laid by our youth mayor, Rose Palmer, as a representative of our future generations. Another extremely important element of Holocaust Memorial events is the delivery of the Holocaust Memorial Prayer and the Kaddish Prayer. Cantor Benjamin Muller will sing the memorial prayer called Kel Mulei Rachamin. Thereafter, Kaddish and the priestly blessing will be recited by Councillor Rabbi Arnold Saunders. And that will be followed by Councillor Andrew Walters, who will recite the liberation. I call upon Cantor Benjamin Muller.
Hail, Mulei Rachamin, Shoichein Bameromim, Hamitzei Menucho Nechoyenu בסייסר כנפי השכינה במערויס קדושים וטהורים כזויר הורוקיה מאירים ומזהירים לנשמות אחינו ואחיותינו בסיסרואי לנשמות הקדושים והטהורים שנרצחו בידי הרוצחים הגרמנים ועזריהם הנאצים יימח שמם באושוויץ, מיידנק, טרבלינקה ובשאר מחנות השמד באירופה שנהרגו ושנרצחו חיים ושנשרפו ונרצחו באחיזוריות על קדושת השם בעבור שאנחנו אחיהם ואחיותיהם קרוביהם ובני משפחותיהם מתפללים בעד הזכרת נשמותיהם. לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירם בססר כנפיו לעולמי ויצרור בצרור החיים אס נשמותיהם אדוני הוא נחלתם וינוחו לשלום על משכבותיהם בגן עדן תהי מנוחתם ונאמר
as we are virtual rather than together, we are not technically quorate, so we cannot say the full Kaddish. I will, however, recite a few words of the Kaddish in Hebrew, and then I will say an English translation. Yiskadal v'yiskadash Shemei Rabba. Yehei Shlomo Rabba min Shemaya v'chayim aleinu al kol Yisrael. Oseh shalom b'imroimav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Blessed and praised, glorified and exalted, raised and honoured, uplifted and lauded, be the name of the Holy One, blessed be He. Beyond any blessing, song, praise and consolation uttered in the world. May there be great peace from heaven and life for all of us. May He who makes peace in His high places make peace for us and all the world. The Nomar, and let us say, Amen, Amen. And I'll conclude with the priestly or Aaronic blessing again, firstly in the original Hebrew and then in English. Yevorechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, Yo'er Adonai panav elecha v'chunecha, Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May the Lord bless you and protect you. May the Lord make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn His face towards you and grant you peace. Amen.
The night is dark, but the morning is coming. Gather your strength. Pick up your courage. Wash away your bitterness. Greet the new morning with hope. Clothe yourself with joy. You will not taste disappointment.
Our event is now concluded. I would like to thank everybody who participated tonight. I'd also like to thank all the members of our organising committee, with a special mention for Magda Sachs, who yet again has excelled the 5th year running. Also, I'd like to thank our BSL signer, Andy Higgins, who has worked so hard this evening. Finally, on behalf of Salford City Council, I would like to thank each and every one of you for joining our online event tonight. I hope that you have found our programme informative and memorable. And I would like to say that in the theme of tonight, I hope that one day in January 2023, Salford Holocaust Memorial Day event will be in person once more. Thank you.